Hop in. You've found the Smart Driving Cars podcast. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good morning, Fred.
Good morning, and we are happy to welcome back with us Futurist, innovation advisor, and author, Chunka Mui. Great to see you again, Chunka.
Thanks, Fred. Hi, Alan. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, nice to have you with us. And again, thank you for coming to my class. They loved you, of course, and so on. We have
That's the most fun I've had on this book tour.
You let the cat out of the bag. You've got a new book out, getting 4 stars on Amazon. It's titled A Brief History of a Perfect Future, Inventing the World We Can Proudly Leave Our Kids by 2050. Sounds like an infrastructure plan to me. First of all, congratulations, Chunka. And let's give our audience a taste of what this book is all about. Sure.
Well, a taste of a 5-year effort. Let me give it a try. The simple story is the future's in our hands, and this book focuses on the future. And we try to make the case that the future can be close to perfect, as close as we can get, or it can be pretty pathetic. And the driver of that is based on some very simple facts, right? So the building blocks that we're going to have to build our future are going to be really, really powerful. We talk about 7 what we call laws of zero that describe essentially major technological capabilities moving to zero marginal costs, or actually zero costs. And they are things that we cover just briefly: computing, communications, information, genomics, energy, transportation, water. And our argument is that all those technologies, as probably don't have to be made, the case doesn't have to be made for this audience, are growing exponentially in capability and on a relative basis driving very close to zero costs. So those are the building blocks we have for the future. But the second point we make in the book is that the building blocks aren't the buildings. We can either create really, really amazing futures with those building blocks, or they can give us really powerful tools to create pathetic futures. And the third part of the book talks about what the builders need to do, the individuals, the organizations, and governments need to do in order to trend us towards the more perfect futures and keep us away from the pathetic ones.
Some people might be confused when you talk about computing costs going to zero or near zero. Alan talks about this all the time too, because there are lots of folks who just returned from the Apple store and just shelled out $1,000 for a thing in their pocket. So what do we mean when we talk about the costs dropping down to near zero?
Well, there are 2 ways of thinking about that. Near zero doesn't necessarily mean it's free, because you may actually use a lot of it. But from a historical perspective, if we had, if we think about what computing cost us 30 years ago, and we think about the amount of computing we get for that same cost today, that is effectively zero. You have more computing power probably in your microphone, if not at least in your phone, than what took Apollo to the moon, right? So you think about the relative cost of computing in 30 years, which is a time frame we work in the book. The amount of computing power we can throw at problems is going to be astronomical, and the relative cost of that compared to how we think about it today is going to be near zero. So the hypothesis that we make, or the thought device we offer to our readers, is imagine that you can throw as much computing power at any problem as you want in 30 years. What are the problems you need to solve, and how can you solve those problems better? Or as we love to talk about on this podcast, the cost of energy drops dramatically, goes close to zero, or the cost of transportation goes close to zero. What kind of futures can we build with that technological capability? So the cost of the capability will be not a constraint. It will be what we choose to do with it.
Yeah, it's so important. Those are such fundamentals. just to think back when it's a little bit more than 30 years ago, but when I used to take 2 boxes of cards and put them into a window and get a 1-day turnaround on whatever it is that I was trying to do per day. And then I sit and watch Elon's AI Day, and they're talking about a box that they're building that's exaflops, 10 to the 18th floating point instructions per second. And I say to myself, holy hell, what kind of things can I address now, even now, with that kind of compute? All the things that I used to think were NP complete, as we like to say, they're so darn big. You don't even try. Okay, all of a sudden we can try. I mean, and in fact, the kinds of things that we can do today in a day's turnaround of, problem looking at, 30 years from now, you're absolutely right. That darn thing, I mean, Moore's law is still here. How can it be? I mean, and it's continuing, and it doesn't, everybody, oh, it's going to stop. Oh, it's going to stop. Oh, it's going and you put that into things like batteries or whatever that you talk about in your book. I mean, wow. Go ahead.
Chunka. Well, and the fascinating thing about that is that it raises new problems that you have to solve in order to take advantage of that capability, right? So
absolutely,
in the early 70s, you could project out what the computing power could be. But if you could look at that and say, we should take that computing power and make better mainframes, better card sorters and better, card readers, as Alain talked about. Or you can say to yourself, well, heck, what are the wireless networks I need to build? What are the operating systems I need to build? What's the new modes of computer user interaction I need to build in order to take advantage of that computing power? What's the infrastructure I need to put in place to take advantage of it? And essentially, if we want to go back in history, that's the way the folks at Xerox PARC thought about it. They said, we know the computing power is going to be there. Yeah. What do we need to do, and who are going to be the users? Well, the users are going to be children. And what we need to do is we need to build graphical user interfaces. We need to build, operating systems, programming language that take advantage of that computing power. And a lot of what we talk about in the book is assume these building blocks are there, but what do you need to build around it so you can take advantage of that capability? And energy is a great example. I mean, we know that in 30 years, solar power, lots of renewable power, is essentially going to be free. I mean, cost per 0.0001 cents per kilowatt hour, right? But that's not going to be worth anything if we don't have the distribution mechanisms, the energy control mechanisms, the infrastructure, all of that stuff to take advantage of that capability. So even with the raw technological power created by the laws of zero, you still have to imagine what the future you want to build and, get working on building that future.
One of the things that I liked in your book, or at least that I got out of it, was the bringing together of the energy and the water issue, and bring talk. I love that one. Go ahead.
Yeah. Chunka. So energy and water, they're the key ingredients of life. But the point we make is that when you have a lot of energy, you can have a lot of water, because you can actually condense water out of the air. You can desalinate seawater. So if you have free energy, you could have free water in the sense, because there's more water in the air, in the atmosphere, than there are in all the rivers on the planet.
But that's not necessarily good, because then you create more Californias, and then what does the world do? I mean,
well, I don't think we can pull too much water out of the air, because you know what? It has a load balancing mechanism that the atmosphere redistributes itself. So we're not mining this one aquifer. But the point is, with power, you can solve a lot of problems, but you have to make sure it's clean power, and you have to make sure that's power that's evenly distributed, that's equitable, accessible, all of that kind of stuff. And we're on that path.
And we can look at a history. I mean, power has always been kind of key. I mean, where did people locate? They located near waterfalls so that they could get power, renewable power, really, right? Otherwise, my goodness, they had to have animals that, they had to feed, they had to clean up their messes and all. I mean, right. I mean, fundamentally.
Right. And as we sit here today, a few miles, down the road from me and you are a whole bunch of politicians arguing about the infrastructure, and they're mostly
Yep.
arguing about the infrastructure of the past, not the
Yep.
infrastructure of the future, and what we need to sort of build the new infrastructure. And of course, we need to fix a lot of current infrastructure, but we also have to think about, what the infrastructure of the 21st century is going to be to deal with the problems that we have and take advantage of the opportunities that we have. And of course, one of those is decarbonization and climate change. And one of the chapters in our book deals with what the future history of climate could be if we took advantage of these tools in as most dramatic and positive ways we could.
Is there a danger at the same time, Chunka, do you think, or that some people will say, well, technology is going to bail us out of whatever trouble we're getting ourselves into, so let's not worry about it?
Well, there is the danger of that. There's always the danger of that. But the point in our book is that the technology only bails us out if we. I mean, the technology is the product of our incredible human creativity and imagination. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of science, comes out of research, comes out of a lot of good policy, lots of market forces. But we can use that technology in a lot of different ways. So it could bail us out, or it could tank us, right? So we have to be proactive and use those tools that we have. Because, we spend 300 pages in the book talking about these marvelous futures that we could have, because it takes a lot to describe them. And we spend about 20 pages talking about these pathetic futures we can have, because it's easy to imagine them. All I have to say to you is 1984, Brave New World, Minority Report, and that tells us how these technologies, whether you're talking about AI or machine learning or genomics, can be warped to bad outcomes. So we can't be complacent that the technology will find the right answers.
Yeah, I mean, in all these things, there's sociology that's on top of the technology or surrounding the technology, or actually that the technology is supposed to deal with is the sociology. And the sociology is, I have no background in that, so I just throw that out. But,
Oh, yeah.
Well, we're seeing the battle over vaccines. Talk about
Yeah.
sociology.
We're seeing the battle over vaccines, but we can't forget that, if this pandemic had happened 10 years ago, we wouldn't have had the vaccine, right? Because the science wasn't advanced to a point where we could have developed it and tested it and deployed it in the way that we could. But we could have still had the pandemic because we had the transportation technology to spread it. So there's lots of great opportunity, but also lots and lots of work to do.
Of course, we want to talk to you about transportation and mobility, and we've talked a little bit about energy. In the book, you say future perfect will include an unlimited number of fully autonomous vehicles, and transportation costs will be much lower than they are today. Get into that for us.
Well, I think it's, we've been talking about, you and Alain in particular have been talking about transportation technology for a number of years now, and it's really a hard problem, autonomous vehicles. They're really, really a hard problem, in the large. We solved a tremendous amount of those problems, in the last few years. I don't know how you would describe it, 90%, 95%, 99%, I'm not sure, but the remaining ones are really hard. But if you sort of look out 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to address most of those problems, and we're going to have the vehicles in Trenton that Alain wants to have for a significant number of use cases. And we're going to figure out how those use cases, how to live within the use cases we can solve. So if you look long range, it's easy to say we're going to have a tremendous amount of autonomous vehicles if we want them, if we can build them in the right way. It's an easy prediction. Now, question is how we're gonna use that capability. I mean, are we going to use it to drive access and economic opportunity, reduce carbon, and have more reasonable urban planning, or we're going to take that technology and use it for to increase, to make some of those problems worse. So the autonomous vehicle capability, we think, is going to be pervasive. How we use it is the question.
Yeah, well, one of the things about transportation is that it's, and I've said this probably in my lectures for 50 years or something like that. It's kind of a backdoor way to do urban design, land use, and whatever, and so on. It's because there's always sort of the if you could control the land use, you could almost do whatever you want, because you decide where people are going to live, where people are going to work, where people are going to play, where people are going to worship, where people are going to whatever, whether they're in a tall building, whichever one you want, you decide that. Then you can probably put a mobility system in there to serve that and do well whatever it is your objective is. Maybe.
Right, yeah.
Okay. But since you can't control that, I mean, nobody's going to tell me what the hell to do. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm overstating it, but of course, but I'm not overstating. I mean, individuals make decisions in their own brains. They look at whatever it is their opportunity set is, and I claim each one rationally picks from the top. You decide to live where you decide you thought was best to live. Fred did, I did, you work where you want, These are individual, microscopic individual decisions. And so what I think the opportunity for transportation is if maybe we can take the transportation question, the mobility, the accessibility question completely out of that choice process and let other things drive that, as opposed to, oh my goodness, I can't get there, therefore I can't do that one. But my goodness, why did transportation interject in there, not putting that as the top thing in your brain to say, hey, I want to do that? Why? Maybe it should be something else that should be. And if you can somehow make transportation free, as you say, go to zero with it. And that means zero, not just in terms of the cash laid out, but the environmental stuff too, the whatever it is that the society cherishes, let that, what does that lead to? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting. And thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the secondary effects of the transportation models that we have are just tremendous, as you say. I mean, essentially, right now we design cities around cars, and we design cities around personal car ownership.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
How that interacts with public transportation.
And if you don't have those, you're done. Okay, right. The fork's in you. Okay,
right. But as the transportation, we did that in the last 100 years. Before that, we designed cities around other things. The map of the Northeast is designed around canals. The right. urban map of the Northeast is designed around canals and roads and railroads, right? And now interstates.
Right. So, Delaware Raritan runs right by here. That's
right. Canal. So one of the things we posit is that the sort of core economics driving that basic product is going to change. Right. And there's going to be a lot of secondary effects that we have to deal with. We could, for example, start designing cities around people, not cars. We could start designing electric grids around the new transportation model. But all those questions need to be on the table. So to go back to your earlier point, Alan, I mean, energy, cheap fossil fuels, high volume fossil fuels is what drove the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, of course. Right? So, it's always been cheap energy that's driven it. Yeah.
So, but a secondary effect of that is carbon and climate change. So you could say, unfortunately, climate change is a secondary effect of the Industrial Revolution, right? Byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. So if we can if we move to sustainable energy, low carbon energy, cheap enough, on an economic basis to push out fossil fuels, what kind of world can we design around that? One of the things that you talked about earlier is that we can solve a lot of water problems,
right?
And we can solve a lot of transportation problems, right? So the combination of cheap batteries, really, really cheap batteries, really cheap energy, and autonomous vehicle technology. I mean, the reason Elon Musk is the richest person in the world is because of Tesla, and the reason Tesla is so valuable is because it's the core weapon that the markets think will drive decarbonization of the automotive industry. I mean, it's a nice car, but it's an electric vehicle. And we need electric vehicles, and everybody's shifting over electric vehicles. So that fundamental change in energy patterns, driven by this larger need to decarbonize, right, is what's creating the opportunity for Tesla, and it's creating the wealth for Musk. And if all of our cars in the world today transition to Tesla electric vehicles, he'd be a trillionaire, and we would have dealt with about 4% of the carbon problem.
Yeah.
So there's 96 other percent of the decarbonization problem that's driving all these other industries. When you're thinking about energy, mining, name it, agriculture, cement, steel, all that kind of stuff.
Food, cows,
right. Food, agriculture,
cows.
And the way that all those other industries will decarbonize are by using these tools that we talk about, that are driven by the laws of zero. And the only way
housing, one of them. I mean, there was an article not too long ago about somebody wanting to put a new city in the California desert or something like that, or whatever, which to me sounds like great, except what seemed to me, I didn't really go into depth, as like for the rich people to go to. I mean,
you're
San
talking
Francisco,
about Tolosa, I think.
San Francisco has an enormous homeless challenge. Okay, and I've just been trying to wonder in my mind, is that a housing challenge, or is that a mobility challenge? I mean, is it?
Yeah.
The issue is if one had mobility, then a lot of people could spread out of San Francisco and wouldn't need to live in San Francisco. So they might create housing availability for those that don't have it, or create housing elsewhere where you can, for some reason, create it for who knows what. You don't have water, you don't have energy, you don't have sewer, you don't have all the other things. And if the mobility would, in New Jersey, we have rules that for low income housing. Okay. And so where do we locate low income housing? On cheap land. Okay. Otherwise we can't afford it. All right. Why is land cheap? Because there's nothing there. Okay. And so therefore getting out of there, if you go there, you have to spend 80% of your disposable income to get a car so you can get a quart of milk that you can't afford to buy because you had to spend 80% of your disposable income to live there. Now, come on, guys or gals.
Transportation.
You want to do affordable living. I don't know. I mean,
you can't have a job if you can't get to a job, and of course, it's hard to get a job if you don't have an address either. I mean, these are all components.
Those are all those things come together, and so you kind of have to bring it in. And so I think the opportunity again if you can get closer to zero on some of these things, that of course the mobility, and you use it appropriately to then. Maybe not to concentrate everything, maybe to spread it out. I don't know. Some other people say, my goodness, it's going to be, Levittowns all over again. Well, guess what? All
right. So these conversations wouldn't be interesting if we didn't have some disagreements.
Yeah,
so let me toss one out.
Okay, please.
I love those cities of the future kinds of projects, because I think that the way we get to one of the ways we get to the future, and this is what we argue for in the book, is that for a while, not forever, you have to put aside the design constraints of today. So yes, the homeless problem in San Francisco is a real problem, but if we can reimagine how we use these tools to design new cities, new transportation patterns, and can in some places start from scratch to build them, then we can we can make these possible futures real, and then we can sort of ask the question, how do we transition in scale from what we have today to the future? So one of the core ideas in our book is that we should project out far enough in the future to write what we call future histories of desirable futures that put aside for now all the problems and constraints of today and say, what kind of future do we want in 2035 or in 2050? And we did do both in the context of transportation. And say, okay, what kind of future do we want that is plausible based on the science that we know we will have? And then work backwards to say, okay, how do we get there from here? What are the midpoints and what are the things we need to start doing now? Because if we just focus on the problems of today, we will probably sub-optimize if not just fail at solving some of those problems.
We won't optimize. We won't even be feasible. I mean, it won't even. Yeah.
Right. So if you want to get to the moon, you don't start by building ladders, right? You start by saying, okay, what is the science that we need to get to the moon? You build that, and in the meantime, you may solve other problems. But sometimes the pathway to that future is not by the incremental path that you assume today.
So this Project Teloso, which you've been reading about, I think this is going to happen, a good idea. This is the billionaire, former Walmart executive who's talking about building this utopian city.
I think build as many as you have. The one I'm really interested in is the one Toyota is working on in Japan, what they call the woven city, right? Which assumes future transportation technology, and ask the question, well, how do we build a city around that? How do we have an integrated mobility design and integrate that with a city and integrate it with the way people live, work, and play? But there are a lot of, Bill Gates has this thing that he's been talking about called Belmont in Arizona. We also read about in the book. There are various urban design projects in the Middle East, lots of things happening in Africa. So I think we need to do that forward research. We need to do that sort of envisioning to imagine how we can accelerate some of these capabilities. And as you guys know, that I love the idea of prototypes. I love the idea of thinking big and then starting small.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, it's fundamental.
Right.
You wrote a book about that, didn't you?
I wrote a book about that, right? And as Gordon Bell, the former the inventor of the minicomputer, said, a demo is worth 1,000 pages of a business plan, right? So can you build it for me? This is how Google started with their driverless car. They said, okay, can you build one that will actually, cross the Bay Bridges? Can you build one that will actually go around, Lake Tahoe? Can you build one that will actually go down Route 1? And so before you do your big business plan, before you do your big capital expense plan, just prove to me that the core technology is possible. And I think that's what these urban city prototypes can do.
I think in a little way, this is what we're trying to do with the whole Trenton thing, not to, pump that, push that, which we're pushing, but, it's really to try to integrate the society, the sociology with the technology. And can we actually do this in the small of a city that for which, boy, if you don't have a car, the opportunity set is just enormously reduced over the opportunity set you have if you have a car. And can we bring it to those who, for whatever reason, don't have access to a car, and try it in the small and see if it works, or there some other things that go in for those folks. I mean, to me, the part of the problem with the whole autonomous taxis, as I call them, people call them other names, I prefer that, but taxis, is that they're like for me to have another alternative over the car that I already have. It just, I mean, when I look at it, it's, for me personally, it's pretty damn good. I mean, anytime I want it, anytime to do, I got that thing, big decision process for me is which one to take. I mean, not to do it. Whereas somebody who doesn't even have one of those guys, I mean, I mean, their life is completely different. It has to be completely different than mine. Not, I guess they're happy campers. And they're just as happy as I am, I guess. But I don't know. I mean, that's really what we're trying to address with that. I went down to the senior home and maybe, not one of the best parts of Trenton on Monday. And I mean, I was almost crying there talking to these people in terms of what they said, how tough it is for them to go do the simplest things in my life that I just don't even think about doing, I mean,
access to transportation.
I hate to be so stupid with this, but I'm just stupid about it. I haven't, it's not me. I haven't experienced it, at least not for the last 50 years.
Access to transportation is, as we know, it's a prime determinant to economic opportunity and quality of life. So I actually, and you know this, Alain, I have no problems with autonomous taxis. I think that enables a business model that will drive lots of development, and I think that will have ripple effects on the kinds of problems you look at. And the reason GM just announced a few months ago they have a $10 billion line of credit secured to build their autonomous vehicles, right? The Cruise, Cruise Origin, and other cars. Is because there are viable business models that are different than what you just described around mobility, autonomous, taxis, things of that sort. But those same technologies will spin out and deal with other harder to solve problems, as you just described. So I think it's great to work on many of the only problems. Let me rephrase. The only problems we address in the book are things like energy and climate change and healthcare and trust, and those are the kind of problems where it's an all hands on deck kind of issue. And I'm perfectly fine with people taking these technologies and going in every direction that they can think, because I think those capabilities, as long as they're working towards a long-term vision that's good for the world, it's great. So every time I hear somebody, every time I hear advocates, for example, who want to deal with climate change poo-pooing somebody else's strategy, I'm thinking, shut up. This is a really big problem. So I don't care if Bill Gates wants to work on nuclear while you work on solar. I want you both to work on it really hard, right? As opposed, because the real enemy is doing nothing.
Right, and we haven't started on those and let those go out there and compete in whatever in some competition or complement each other. In the end, it's not all or nothing. I mean, there are still people in Pennsylvania and other places that have horses and buggies and love their lives with horses and buggies and live their lives and enjoy whatever to do, right?
All the more power to them. But the thing you have to ask yourself is, am I working towards that long-term, the right long-term goal? So Gates, for example, has this investment thesis with his Breakthrough Energy Ventures portfolio that says, look, I'm going to work on a lot of different things, but I'm not going to work on anything that doesn't deal with at least 1 billion tons of carbon, which is 0.5% of the decarbonization problem we have. It has to be a material thing, right? I have to working towards a material solution to a big problem. And if you're doing that, then great, go for it. If you're doing something that sort of deals with the 1/1000th of a percent of something, then you're wasting my time. But are you working on a material problem 30 years out? I think that's both where the social need is, but also that's where the economic opportunity is. And I apologize, every time I talk to you guys, you make me feel like I'm sort of like scattered all over the place because we're talking about so many different
No, of course it's everything. I mean, hopefully we like to talk about all those pieces too. I mean, I think that what we need to do with electric vehicles is not just change the internal combustion engine to electric vehicles, but we've got to get somehow the batteries to be able to do what you want. I mean, get to zero somewhere, to have some, Moore's lawish advancement in that technology,
Right.
because otherwise, that sucker's not going to zero. And our history on that, we plot the data, it's basically flat. It's not one of these, I mean, we've made some improvements lately. Somebody looks at me, we have work to do.
We have work to do, but the improvements are pretty dramatic. And
They
and batteries in
absolutely.
particular, it's really, I mean, a large part of it is scale as well. But I think, the short version of the story is there's tremendous opportunity, right?
Yeah.
There's tremendous opportunity both to solve real problems that we have as a society and make lots of money. And that requires a combination of individual action, organizational action, and governmental action. If you go back to Tesla wouldn't exist if it weren't for decades of government-funded research in batteries.
Yeah.
Wouldn't exist if it wasn't for hundreds of millions of dollars of direct loans. Wouldn't exist if it wasn't for incentives to buy electric vehicles, and
Yeah.
wouldn't exist if consumers didn't actually respond and buy those vehicles. So that requires all that stuff. And in order to scale, it's going to take another whole range of governmental action around grid transformation, actually delivering energy to those places, making sure it's clean energy, more incentives for purchasing. It's going to depend on folks like us who say when they buy their next car, do I want to buy an EV or do I want to buy a combustion engine? Right. So
absolutely.
There are people out there, Chunka, who are saying that the push by automakers and governments to force electric vehicles out there, to switch to solely electric vehicles, that they're too far ahead, that we don't have the grid ready, that how are we going to power these? Is it going to be coal? So what are your thoughts about that? Is it something that by saying we're going to be electric, now let's solve this other problem, that
yes,
it's a necessary thing?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we have to set that goal, and then we have to build towards that goal, right? So if GM says, I'm going to stop doing research or development on internal combustion engines, I'm going to have a 15-year plan to sell only electric. That changes their incentives in terms of what they lobby for, in terms of policy, what they push energy companies to. It also gives energy companies a target to aim for in terms of the product mix they have to build towards. So you need to have those long-term plans, both to essentially get to the goal, but that's what guides technology and capital investment, right? So these are virtuous. What you want to do is create a virtuous cycle, right? That gets us to the long-term solution. And if we all wait, then we never get started. So it's going to take us a long time to move the car park to electric vehicles, and there's a long stretch for us to build the infrastructure around that. But we need to do it as fast as possible.
Yeah, and folks, somebody has to get out there and lead, and it's kind of good that those that are choosing the lead, and I guess some of us look to our leaders to lead, and so yes, of course, somebody may not want to go on the long march, but
yes,
it's
somebody's going to dig that last ton of coal.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And somebody else is going to push on the solar. And we're going to have a transition, and how fast that transition happens has economic implications, and unfortunately it also has climate implications.
And and some people are going to push sequestration to, then if you do the coal, you can then take the carbon, stick it in the earth, and somehow bury it and whatever, and hey, get that to work. Who knows? I mean, whatever. But that's going to be because, of course, somebody's led out there and says, oh, my goodness, we got to figure out how to clean up this coal. Else we're out of here, and
right.
That's good too. If that happens, I mean, it ends up to be the same thing if that all works. I mean, that's big if.
One of the most positive things I think that's starting to happen, and it needs to happen a lot more, is that investors are realizing, hey, while a company may think that it needs to maximize the next 5 years and then just go out of business, you're still going to have your portfolio. I mean, if you're BlackRock and you're managing $8 trillion worth of money, you want that money to survive the energy transition.
Right.
So you actually want to invest in a longer term time frame, because you could actually, put all your money in fossil fuels, make a ton of money in the short term, and then be left holding the bag.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
that transition risk is becoming more and more apparent to investors. They're not quite sure what to do with it, but it's becoming more apparent. And I think that will drive more positive actions on the form of management and companies.
You mean some people might decide to make money every day is a good way to do things, as opposed to, pump it up and flip it and making money? I mean,
Make money every
wouldn't
day
that
and
be
have some money
amazing?
left
I
at the
mean,
end too.
yeah, right. I mean, but there, of course, the whole thing has to operate. It has to do it every day. It has to actually, end up generating the electrons, creating them, bringing them to the cart. I mean, that's a heavy lift every day. It has to put food on our tables, has to put roofs over our heads, has to give us clothes to buy, So in the end, it's not just the flip. It's really, the day-to-day fundamental things, move people, and
Right.
I think the investment community sees value in the day-to-day things too. So,
Well,
yes,
while
Fred.
we're on that subject, Alan, we'll be back with more. But first, this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETFs, Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, we should point out it's a good idea to read the white paper. It's called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under a tab called Insights and News. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. And you may know that ETFs can be a smart way to spread risk with investments and focus on a particular category of stocks. The website again is motoetf.com. We're back with more of Smart Driving Cars and our guest, Chunka Mui, futurist and author of the new book, A Brief History of a Perfect Future, Inventing the World We Can Proudly Leave Our Kids by 2050. What a title. Chunka, you spent 5 years on this book. And I guess near the end, my guess is we hit this pandemic. Did it change any of your thinking with everyone working and learning from home?
Oh, well, I think it reinforced my thinking about the power of human creativity and our ability to adapt and adjust to problems when we set our minds to it.
Yeah, this all had to happen so fast for schools, for employers, et cetera.
And as I alluded to earlier, think about if this pandemic had happened 10 years earlier. Some things like this podcast would not have been possible. Right. Things like the rapid shift to telehealth would not have been possible. The rapid shift to work from home would not have been possible. The sequencing of the virus, and the building of vaccines almost overnight after that sequencing would not have been possible. The testing would not have been possible. So the core technology, the tools that we have are so fundamental to how we respond to these problems, and fundamental to the kinds of worlds that we can build. So, I mean, I know that we don't want to think about technology as a silver bullet, and it never is. But it's a powerful, powerful weapon. It's going to really, really be much more powerful by 2050. And tell you, one of the backstories about why I took 2050 as the milestone. In 2050, it means it's hard for many people to think, 30 years out, I can't get my hands around that. That's too far out. In 2050, my daughter is going to be the same age I was when she was born. Right? I can imagine her in 2050. And I think we can all if we sort of imagine something close to us and something we really care about, we can start saying, hey, I guess what we get to in 2050 really matters. And it should matter to what I do today and how I get there. So this book is really trying to sort of posit these immense tools that we can build, but really ask the question of the reader: what slice of that future do you want to be a part of, and can you work on, and what can you do today, to get us towards that kind of future as a what can you do as a consumer, as an investor, as an employee, as a government employee, as the president, right, as a CEO, and then how does that ladder up to what your organization does and what the government does? And that's what's the real, the real message is that future is really in our individual hands, because collective action depends on that individual responsibility.
How confident are you that we're really going to be seeing the kinds of changes that you talk about in the book? I mean, I think back to the 1960s, the late 60s, and the movie 2001 that Kubrick made. And boy, what a future. And that was going to happen by 2001. And here we are. It's still not even close.
I mean, the short answer is that I'm immensely confident about the technological capabilities we have and very pessimistic about whether or not we are actually going to build the futures we can out of them. So one of the things we're trying to do explicit in the book is we're not trying to predict what's going to happen by 2050. Because if you were to predict, you probably have some pretty gruesome, awful predictions, because predictions are sort of like what's the most likely thing to happen based on what's happening today. And we get to some pretty bad places there. So instead, what we're trying to say is let's not predict the future. We play off of the old Alain phrase, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So what we posit is what are the futures we could actually invent if we put our minds to it and hold those up as goals, as targets, and hopefully get people to reframe around that as opposed to just sort of incrementally going forward on where they are today.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very good way to look at it. I mean, I look at my students in my classes right now, 30 year over their next 30 to 40 year span of when they're, the key influence of the world is basically exactly what you were talking about, the target. They're the ones that are going to do it. Where are they going to start? They're starting from whatever they have now and trying to take it. They're the ones that are going to take it there. And in some sense, yes, maybe we haven't reached what the movie 2001 wanted us to reach, but in other ways, we've gone way beyond it in some sense, and have really, done some things and done it very well. I mean, when people were first talking about video phones, I said, I don't want to look at Chunka when I'm talking to him. I mean, I love it now. Zoom, I don't know. I guess Zoom's done a reasonable good job. We sort of complain about it every once in a while, but my goodness, look at what we're doing.
Look at what we're doing.
Look at how many other, and it's not just us. Look at how many people did it. Kidding me? The band, how the heck we get that bandwidth? I mean, Kubrick didn't even think about the bandwidth, but at some point you need bandwidth to do that. Oh my goodness.
This is why we're able to do this, right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Of the bandwidth, right?
It's the bandwidth. And what does it cost us? I don't know. I guess we must be rich guys. We don't even know what it costs us.
Well, this meeting essentially costs us zero.
It's essentially nothing. And it is, there may have been a lot of fixed costs associated with it. A lot of folks made and lost money on it, but we're at a point now where the margin, the cost to produce it going forward, zero. Right. And that's, to me, that's what's very interesting. It's so interesting about your book is you really go through, the fundamental building blocks. This isn't some little nuance, little blip on some whatever we have to trade right now and get ahead I mean, these are fundamentals.
I guess we've all forgotten how much it used to cost to make a voice call a few towns over, even not to mention.
A party line. I mean, and you had to put those quarters and dimes in there, and you never made a long distance call. I mean, oh my goodness. I mean, Jesus, out of your area code.
Absolutely.
I mean,
and Chunka, so one other thing. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I want to make an offer to your readers. I mean, to your listeners, to your watchers. If you've made it this far, in
Yeah.
this podcast. You know, of course, I want you to go out and buy the book and write great reviews of it, all that kind of stuff. But if you've made it this far in this podcast and you're hearing me say this, send me an email and I'll send you the book for free. Because what I really want, this is not about selling books. This is about selling ideas. And I'd be happy to send that book to any of your listeners and get in a conversation with them about it.
Well,
I don't know if you're going to tell them your email address.
Well, I'm easy to find. Dr. Google will point you to me very easily, but chunkamui@gmail.com will get me as well.
Well, tell us what your thoughts are. One last thing here. The battle between countries, the United States versus China, I guess specifically here, does that have the power to speed things up or to put the brakes on?
Oh, I think it will speed things up as long as it doesn't kill us. Right? The battle between the US and China fundamentally is an economic battle, and competition is good for innovation. Right? Unfortunately, we have different political views on how government interacts with competition and markets. And we also have, the incumbent wanting to crush the startup, which happens everywhere, except that this incumbent, the startup, have nuclear weapons and aircraft carriers and planes, all that kind of stuff. So the competition will be good as long as we remember that it's an economic competition and not some fundamental, good versus evil competition. But politics is crazy, and as we know, ideology is crazy, and partisanship can lead to really, really bad places, and hopefully we don't get there.
Well, that's part of the sociology of this whole darn thing. I mean, look, everybody has to realize we're all different, and thank goodness we're different. Okay, because if we all thought the same, I mean, the world would be a really boring place. I mean, and I like to tell the students, if we all thought the same, all the guys would like just one girl, and all the girls would love just one guy. And guess what? I mean, you don't get out of Adam and Eve. I mean, nothing happens. I mean, thank goodness we're all different. I mean, come on. I mean, and we like the French say, "Vive la différence." What the hell? And come on, and we should, and in competition, whenever you compete with somebody, you sort of say some bad words against them too. Let's get somewhat behind them. Maybe we shouldn't be so grade schoolish about that, but it's, hey, if you look at the Cold War, luckily the Cold War was largely an economic thing. I mean, I don't know how we didn't blow ourselves up. Okay, I don't know how somebody.
Well, we came close a few times.
I mean, Cuban Missile Crisis. Holy hell! I mean, I shudder every time you go back and look at those things that with JFK sitting there. I mean, it's all on film. I mean, whoa! But somehow we made it through that. It just seems to me that the things that were with respect to China, it's. They're looking to do it one way, we're looking to do another way. We say that whatever your mother wears combat boots or something like that, make some those.
So for example, if you look at development of electric vehicles, battery technology, that sort of competition, solar panels, competition has been good for the world, right? We've gotten some great products at scale. So let's hope we keep it at the level of competition and economic, because that could increase the pie for everyone. When Coke tries to beat Pepsi, they're not also having contingency plans on invasion. So let's hopefully it doesn't get to there.
Yeah, and and every startup tries to cut the legs out of the big guy or gal up there and take over, and of course the big guy or gal out there is looking to whatever crush that little too, or maybe whatever, bring it in and take it out of business when they buy them out, whatever. So I think we all need to realize that this is all what happens in the playground that we're in. We're in a playground, but we do have to sit back every once in a while and say, cool down a little bit. Vive la différence. It's great that we're all different. It's wonderful. Let's hug everybody and, and be happy together.
Yes, and please keep on buying our bonds. While you do that.
Yeah, I mean, you're bailing us out, and if you don't, we're just gonna default on that. The hell with you guys. I mean,
but if we default,
come try to get it.
Right?
I don't know. It's way out of my league, but again, I mean, I think the good thing that does tend to exist, or I think I see in the classroom, certainly these days, is it's nice that we have a broader mix, everybody respects everybody else. There's a lot more respect for everybody else today, I think, which is, at least maybe I'm just here in this bubble here and so on. And even, hey, the people who don't want to get vaccinated, that's fine. I'll hug them too. Just not the way I think, but they're allowed to think the way they want. I mean, come on. I think we have to allow that. So I don't know.
One other headline to touch on, Alan,
Yeah.
here. Amazon self-driving cars are coming to downtown Seattle. The Seattle Times reports safety advocates are not pleased. We're talking, of course, about Zoox.
Yeah, I know. I mean, my goodness, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I think Zoox is trying to do a good thing, and I don't say. I mean, the part of the problem of the driverless vehicles is it's been, a lot of the folks have been trying to sell it as safety. No, it's mobility. And in fact, if you look at it, it's mobility, the equitable mobility piece, which is what I push, and it's the thing I'm pushing, but that's the real value. And there are lots of folks in Seattle area whose lives can be improved by this stuff. And and it's not that it's unsafe, And of course, I'd like to say to Zoox, come to Trenton, you're not going to get headlines like that, okay? Or at least I don't know what headlines you're going to get, actually, so I shouldn't say that, because I mean, people push different things and come out with different stuff, and I guess at times you have to have a thick skin, but I don't know.
Well, we want to remind people again, Alan, about the Smart Driving Cars Summit, the Princeton Summit, now set for May.
Yeah, we had to move it. I mean, it's better in May. I mean, the key thing of the summit this year is going to be the festival that we have, and the festival is for the folks who think they have equitable, affordable, high quality mobility that they'd like to bring to Trenton. Please come. But when you come and push your product, sit there and listen to the people who come and see what they want. You have the how, they have the want. And the how and the want have to come together. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I'm not so sure that necessarily all the folks that are dealing with the how are looking and know really what the people want. I know what they want. I know they know what they want. But we want to do this in Trenton, and it should be their wants, and we should look at what they want. I can tell them what to do. To hell, that shouldn't be me. That they get to have their wants. I get my want. I don't know. Sorry about the political whatever on that, Chunka, but
the welcoming environment has always been what you've talked about.
Well, I think we're taking
meeting with people.
Yeah, we're taking a slightly different perspective on this and so on, and I think I go there and people are there. They're trying to have good lives. And they're trying to have better lives. So let's listen to them and ask them what they think might make their lives better. They might be able to educate us.
Terrific. Well, Chunka, we really appreciate you spending the time to join us again. Really terrific. And thank you for being so generous with your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Chunka, always great. And thank you not only for this, but coming to my class. My students, of course, loved you. I mean, it's very inspirational, and it's, and really, when you look at it, they're the key folks that we should be talking to, because guess what? They're going to do a lot of stuff over the next 40 years.
That's right.
And let's hope, hey, we'll let them decide what they think is right. Okay. I don't want to tell them what's right. I mean, what the hell do I know?
Well, the title of the book again is A Brief History of a Perfect Future, Inventing the World We Can Proudly Leave Our Kids by 2050. Chunka, where's the best website for people to go to for more info? And I don't know if you want to repeat your offer again.
My offer is send me an email. I will send you the book. The best website to go to find out about the book is Amazon.com.
Yeah, it's there, and it's not that expensive. You can afford it. Okay. And look, and so on. But really it's very nice for you to come on, and, we're just trying to let people learn, I guess.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more info is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Amazon, Google, Spreaker, wherever you get your podcasts. Smart speakers can play us too. You can find my tech reports at techstination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching, and continue to stay safe.
Thank you, Chunka. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next week.